What's going on, guys? Zuko back with another Last Epoch video. Hope you're all doing very, very well. I'm going to do a video today on defense. I'm going to cover all the different layers of defense in this game. And I had some criticism from some of you guys in the comments about some of my other videos being really, really slow in terms of my ability to get the information out, and felt like I was maybe wasting your time. So I am going to go quicker this time. I do agree that I think my other videos were a little bit slower, so I appreciate the feedback. We're going to go quicker this time, try and get through all the different layers of defense in this game. There is a ton of them to get through, so let's just dive right in. Whenever you're playing an action RPG game like Path of Exile or Last Epoch, for example, you're going to need to create layers of defense to stay alive. You need multiple different things that are helping you to mitigate damage that's coming in. The first thing, of course, is your health. You need to get a certain amount of max health in order to stay healthy, especially in the end game when you're in the monolith system. When you're getting to the empowered monoliths, you're going to need to get a certain amount of baseline health just to avoid getting one shot. That's the primary reason for health. And in the late game, you're going to want to aim for something like 1,500 to 2,000 health, depending on which mastery you're playing. Like, you might have a build where you're getting a whole bunch of ward, and so you don't need as much health, but generally speaking, something like 1,500 to 2,000 is a good range to look at in terms of endgame health. Ward is the second layer of defense I'm going to talk about. If you have a character that can scale ward effectively, you should do it. And ward in this game is just a shield that goes over top of your health bar. Unlike Path of Exile, which has a shield as well, it's just permanent and it stays there, and then as you lose shield, it goes back up. In this game, your shield, your ward, always decays. It's always going to be going back down to 0. So it's your job to actually also invest into ward retention. It's kind of like life regeneration. It's kind of like getting health regen on your ward. So the ward retention will slow down how quickly your ward is decaying, okay? Very, very important. So if you have a build that invests heavily into ward, you also need to invest into ward retention, okay? So that your ward does not reduce that quickly. There's all kinds of different ways to get ward. There's like ward per second, ward on hit, ward on kill. You'll figure it out. But again, ward retention is a big thing there. For health, health regeneration is also actually pretty important. Not one of the most important stats in this game, and a lot of people seem to think health regeneration is just really, really bad, but on characters that cannot invest into ward, if you only have your life, then life regeneration is actually pretty good and a good stat to sort of look at in terms of gear. You can get percent regen or flat regen as well. Let's keep going here. We're going to get to the first thing on this sort of spreadsheet here. This is all your defense, by the way, on this page. It's really, really helpful. Let's talk about armor. Armor in Last Epoch is a little bit different than, say, Path of Exile. In Path of Exile, your armor reduces physical damage taken. In Last Epoch, your armor will also reduce damage against any hit, including spells. So if you get hit with a fireball or a lightning blast, that's going to be reduced by armor. You can see right here, it says armor is only 70% as effective against non-physical damage. So my armor right now is gonna reduce physical damage by 27%, and it's going to reduce non-physical damage by 19%. So armor is important no matter what build you have, because it reduces damage that you take from all hits. It does not reduce damage taken from damage over time. Poison, bleeds, those kinds of things. It does not do anything for that, okay? Any damage over time, you're in trouble there. So you have to find other ways to mitigate that. But having a baseline amount of armor in every single build is actually really important, because it's going to stop that damage from hitting you, and just flat damage reduction is really, really good. Let's talk about dodge. Dodge is also really cool in this game, because dodge gives you a chance to avoid getting hit by anything that's going to hit you. I said that really poorly, but any hits that are gonna connect with you, you can dodge them, including fireballs and lightning blasts, any spells, okay? Again, it has no reduction against damage over time, but this makes dodge a much more valuable stat in Last Epoch than, say, in Path of Exile, in my opinion, because in Path of Exile, you can get your dodge pretty high, or it's your evade? No, I think evade's gone there. I think it's evade there now, because they got rid of dodge. You can get your, evade really, really high, but you still have to get like spell suppression in Path of Exile to stop spells from doing damage to you. But in Last Epoch, you can dodge spells. So very, very important stat, actually. You can scale this pretty hard. I didn't really understand how much dodge actually meant in terms of the value. So getting like plus 80 dodge, for example, is actually a lot. It doesn't look like a lot because the numbers seem like they're a little bit lower, but they're actually not. It's actually a really, really high number. 80 dodge is really, really good here. And then, obviously, this is a percent dodge thing. There are certain masteries in the game that have a lot more dodge synergy. Of course, all the rogue masteries, and then some of the primalist ones have quite a bit as well. Just understand, you can dodge any hit that's coming at you. Spells, arrows, melee hits, all of it. So it's a pretty good stat to actually invest in. You need to go pretty hard. It is capped at 85%. Or is it 80? Let me just look really quickly. It's 85% is what dodge is capped at. Your armor, I forgot to mention, is capped at 85% as well, okay? So you're never really going to get to that number, but both of those are capped at 85, okay? Let's keep going. Let's get to the resistances. So your resistances are really important by the end game, and you need to make sure that you're maxing those out. There are lots of things you can do to buff your resistances and even go over top of the cap of your resistances, which they are capped at 75, not 85. So by the end game, you're going to want to be capping all of these resistances, and there's a really good reason why. This is really important to understand. Enemies will penetrate your resistances based on the level of the area that you are in up to 75. So this is really important to understand. All enemies gain 1% of penetration per area level up to maximum 75. So in the late game, when you're getting to these monoliths, once you get to ending the storm, this is a level 75 area. Once you get beyond that, well, that area and beyond, the enemies are going to have 75% penetration on these resistances, okay? Physical, cold, lightning, fire, all of these. That means that if you do not have 75% resistance to all those different damage types, you're going to be taking increased damage. So if I only have 50% lightning res and I'm in this area up here, they're going to be doing 25% more damage because they can put me into the negative, essentially. You can put your resistances into the negative, okay? So really important to understand that. Getting more than 75% of a resistance does not help you unless enemies are shredding that resistance. If enemies have armor shred, elemental shred, poison shred, you need to have resistances that are over the cap in those particular situations. So it is still helpful to have something that pushes your resistances above 75, but the bottom line here is that you want to try and get to 75 if you can. It's not as punishing in Last Epoch as it is in, say, Path of Exile. In Path of Exile, if you don't have your resistances capped, you're literally just screwed. Like, you're just going to completely die. In this game, it's not quite as bad, but it is still really important in the end game, especially once you get to empowered monoliths. You really just have to get those resistances capped, okay? But remember, just a really quick note about overcapping them. This is going to help you with enemies that are shredding your resistances. That's the only reason to overcap your resistances, okay? Let's keep going here. We're going to get into some more of the nitty-gritty of the resistances now, or the damage reduction. So block chance. If you have a chance to block, there's two factors here. There's block chance and block effectiveness. If I put this shield on, this gives me a chance to block at 25%. Block effectiveness is simply just the amount of damage reduction that you will get when you block. So I have 28% block effectiveness here with this one shield. You can scale this number really, really high. Sentinel, all the Sentinel masteries have really, really good synergy with blocking and block effectiveness. So if you want to do a character that relies on block, you can block anything that can hit you. Once again, damage over time does not count, but anything that can hit you, you can block it. In order to stop damage over time, if you're wondering, primarily it's going to be about resistances and then just straight damage reduction, okay? Those are going to be the best ways to stop damage over time from killing you, is having a maxed resistance and then having damage reduction. But again, just back to block really quickly, this can be scaled really, really high, and it's very, very powerful because it stops anything that can hit you, including spells. Very, very good. Okay? Let's keep going here. We've got Endurance. This is a really unique mechanic just to Last Epoch. So you can see it says it right here, reduces damage dealt to your health below your endurance threshold, does not reduce damage dealt to ward. So this can be a little bit confusing. You can see my health bar has a little yellow line at the bottom of it there. Here's what this does. If you get Endurance Threshold, that's going to increase this yellow line at the bottom of my health bar. It's going to raise that up so that when my health gets to that yellow line, my endurance will kick in. Endurance is just damage reduction, okay? You just take less damage once your endurance is kicked in. Your endurance threshold allows you to make that damage reduction kick in sooner. So you can raise your endurance threshold. That will move this yellow line down here up a little bit more so that when your health gets below that yellow line, you'll take less damage. So this is a really cool stat. It's very, very good for stopping one-shots from killing you. And as I said before, it's also very good at helping you with damage over time. There are certain masteries that have a lot of endurance support. Some don't, but like, for example, Primalist does. Beastmaster has some really good, so you can raise your endurance threshold with Beastmaster. So, for example, this is 80 endurance threshold, and then this is another 140. That's 220 endurance threshold. My endurance threshold right now is 143. If we add 220 to that, it becomes 363. That's going to raise this yellow line right here. It's going to raise that up to almost the halfway point on my health bar. That means when I drop below my halfway point, my endurance will kick in. I'll take less damage, okay? So you can play around with that if you want to. And again, there's some masteries that can really bump the endurance threshold super high, which is super cool. It is capped. Endurance itself, the actual damage reduction, endurance, is capped at 60%. So again, you can't go any higher than that, but that's a lot of damage reduction, which is pretty crazy. And you'll always get a certain amount of endurance threshold based on your maximum life. So even if you don't invest any like talent point or skill points, for example, passive points here into endurance threshold, you're still going to get some just by increasing your maximum health, which again, health is so important. Make sure you're putting health on almost all your gear, okay? Let's keep going. We've got crit avoidance. This is a very interesting stat here. Critical strike avoidance, and then you also have a stat that reduces the damage that you take from critical strikes. So critical strikes always do extra damage to you, right? You can either avoid them by getting critical strike avoidance, or you can get a stat that reduces the damage that you take, extra damage that you take from critical strikes. You can either go one or the other. You can get crit avoidance up to 100%, and this is the better of the two stats. If you completely avoid a crit, it will just become a regular hit. It'll still hit you, but it will reduce, it'll stop it from obviously doing the extra damage to you that a crit would normally do. So crit avoidance in the late game is very important. There's a couple of pieces of gear that can roll it, and it can be very, very helpful. But it's something that you're going to want to think about as you get later into the game. It's not super important in the early game, okay? Glancing Blow is a rogue-only stat, I think, right now. I don't believe any other mastery has access to Glancing Blow. It simply says, grants a chance to only receive a Glancing Blow when you take a hit. You take 35% less damage from a Glancing Blow. So that's very important, but I believe it's only rogue-only, so don't worry about too much if you're not a rogue. Let's talk about damage reduction, though, because that is a rogue-only damage reduction. Other classes, other masteries, sorry, have lots of damage reduction as well. They come in all kinds of different forms. You're just going to have to type in damage reduction into your or you can, what is this, I guess it'd be like less damage taken. You could type damage reduction, less damage taken, those kinds of things. You will find it. Every single mastery has them. For the Primalist, for example, you have Ursine Strength, less damage taken from enemies that are nearby, 16% less damage taken. Aspect of the Boar is another 30% DR. So these two put together is 46%. It actually doesn't scale quite like that. It doesn't add. It's multiplicative. So it's not 46%, but you are going to get lots of value out of having damage reduction, and damage reduction stops damage from hits and damage over time. So you really do need to invest in damage reduction as much as you possibly can, because it's going to stop that damage over time. It's going to, again, create another layer of defense. At the end of the day, you really do want to have as many layers as you possibly can. The very last thing I'm going to talk about is Frailty. This is a really cool debuff that you can put on enemies. You can see on this sword, I have 40% chance to apply Frailty on melee hit. If we type in Frailty here, you can click on it. Frailty makes the affected target deal 6% less damage, and it can stack 3 times. So that's 6, 12, 18% less damage. Once again, that less damage is going to be, there's going to be multiplicative measures there. But again, we're talking about as many layers as you can possibly get to make your character more tanky. So if we just recap it here, you want to get a high amount of health or a high amount of ward, whichever is kind of best for your mastery. You want to make sure you're getting your resistances capped as much as you can so that the enemies that are going to have elemental penetration are not doing extra damage to you. Make sure you have all these capped. Make sure you have either armor or dodge, a little bit of both. Armor is always really good because it stops damage from all hits. Dodge can dodge damage from all hits. Damage over time can only really be taken care of with your resistances, your endurance, and then damage reduction is going to stop damage over time. You can run a block build if you want to. You can get stun avoidance. I didn't really talk about stun avoidance, but it's not really a great stat. You basically just want to increase your maximum health to avoid getting stunned, and obviously just avoid getting hit by enemies in general. That's going to help you with your stun avoidance. But you want to start creating layers, guys. Think about these as layers of an onion or whatever you want to say. You need to have good health, have good resistances, have armor or dodge or block. Pick one of the 3 of those and go really hard on it, or get a mixture of all 3. But ideally, you probably want to just pick one of the 3 of these: dodge, block, armor. Get some of all of them. Invest in them heavily, and then the last one you're going to want to get is damage reduction. Find where your damage reduction is on your mastery and invest in it so that you have that extra layer. And then at the very end game, you can also start adding in things like Frailty to get even more damage reduction. Health regeneration is another cool one that I really like on my characters, but you can think about that or not think about it. It's up to you. Create as many layers of defense as you possibly can, and it will keep you alive in this game, and you'll be able to get right into the end game, get into the empowered monoliths, and have a blast down there, okay? Thank you guys so much for watching. Let me know if I missed anything. This is just straight defense. I know I didn't talk about Leech. Leech is another form of defense in a way because you're getting it back, but really I wanted to just talk about the standard sort of forms of defense right now, and if I missed anything, let me know. If you guys appreciate this video and you want to see more like it, please let me know as well. I hope this was helpful for you guys. Thank you so much again for watching. Love you all. I will see you in the next one.